Okay, so we are live. So, welcome to everyone who's watching live. Welcome to those who are watching on the replay. So, my guest today is Carla. Carla, I always say this about all my guests. Could you just introduce yourself and give the highlights of what you think is important for people to know about you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's hope that LinkedIn doesn't think this is totally inappropriate and is going to cut us off. So fingers crossed, first of all, that we, when we start talking about the topics, that it's deemed acceptable by the LinkedIn gods. So I'm a sex, love, and relationship coach. So what that means is I work with men, women, and couples who are struggling to be seen in their relationships with emotional, physical intimacy, and basically bringing them back to themselves. And, a lot of the people that connect with me on LinkedIn will have seen the tagline that I use. It's not just sex, it's been unapologetically you from bedroom to boardroom. And the reason that I have that tagline is because when I started out doing the work that I do and started supporting people in the deepest, most shameful parts of themselves, which is their sexuality and how they show up in relationships. As they started doing that work and that learning and having all of that self-compassion, it really had a massive ripple effect on various areas of their lives. And one notable area was in their work life or career. People having the confidence to ask for promotions, people quitting their job, setting up their business that they'd always dreamed of. And I think the reason being is our sexuality and how we relate to other people are the most vulnerable parts of who we are as a human being. So even though you may do work on your money mindset, and you may do work on self-love from a general self-love perspective, if you aren't fully in tune with who you are, at the core level of a human being, because our sexuality, the instinctual part of us, the conscious part of our sexuality, if we're not in touch with that, and you don't claim that with confidence, and you don't have compassion for the parts that are, that you're still learning to love yourself around, and you don't have that, then just how you feel and how you move in the world is very, very different. And the thing that I always say to people when people go, how is this relevant to the workplace? It's when you are in a great relationship and you're having amazing sex, when you feel really, really connected, how are you going to show up at work? You're just going to feel really good and just move differently. And this is the same for men or women, for everybody. And then, just think about the times when you've had an argument with your partner in the morning on your way to work. Maybe, were messaging somebody for a date, and the date seemed to go okay. And in the morning, you get that message that actually they don't want to meet up with you again, and how that feels going into work. Or maybe you initiated sex the previous night, your partner said no, and that sense of rejection and what's wrong with me, but you don't have the skills to communicate, either of you talk about it, and how that transforms into your day. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. It does impact every area of our lives, including how we show up in the workplace as well. So that, in a nutshell, I don't know how shell of it is, but that's who I am and what I do.
There is so many different directions I can go on this, because you said so much. The word shame came up, and I think maybe we'll pause that for a moment, and because I think there's a big talking point around shame. It reminded me of this conversation I had recently on a live. We were talking about emotional intelligence and bringing emotions to work. And one of the big things about that conversation was that we're often told to leave emotions at the door, and then you try and sort of bury them or leave them. But the reality is you're carrying them in one form or another. And, if you're in touch with your emotions, in touch with what's actually going on, you can make much better decisions. You're a lot freer. And by suppressing all of these things, we're almost incentivized to do that. But the reality is it shows up in so much of our life, in the way that we work, the relationship we have with our partners, the relationship we have with our kids, just as who we are and in every way. So I love this because it's basically an extension to that conversation, but at a much, I want to say a more physical but deeper level. It was a very deep conversation, but it's this area that we don't talk about. Now, full disclosure, when you and I came into contact, I was very nervous about reaching out, and I think, you know, we had a bit of back and forth, and I was like, oh, am I well placed to have this conversation? I thought we were going to, you know, talk about sex toys and everything like that, and I was like, oh, I'm so out of my depth very quickly, and all these feelings came up of, okay, out of my depth, I don't know what I'm talking about. But I did this, and I mentioned it to you before, I did this conversation around perimenopause for ladies, and I learned so much from that. And I think by not knowing a lot of the questions, or not knowing a lot of the answers, or even thinking that you do, is actually a good place to start to have a conversation with someone like you, so you can either help me re-understand or change my mindset, or just bring me out of my shell a little bit, because I know we obviously had a chat before this as well, and I think that's so important. And like you say, this is, you know, such a big thing, right? And it's we don't talk about it, and it's that either we're shameful of talking about it, or even with our partners, and I guess we can dig into that in a second. But the last part I'll say before I actually pick which direction I think maybe we go in, or I can throw it over to you. But you said with LinkedIn, you know, whether this actually gets streamed. So the advertisement that I made for this conversation had the word sex in it, and the advertisement went out, but the picture actually got blocked, and I understood, and I had to redo it. And it's really strange, because it's quite ironic that we're having a conversation about something that is very natural, yet it is deemed that this is going to be a conversation that is not appropriate for LinkedIn, whereas actually it really is. So I saw the irony. I changed the thumbnail for this marketing for this conversation, because I wanted people to actually, I would love people to hear this and, you know, understand so much from you and all of these things, because I think I believe it's a very important conversation, something we don't talk about, and just something, even if one person listens to this, and, you know, it can change how they show up and how they feel about themselves, their relationship, and that, like you say, has ripple effects on many things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to acknowledge you, Colin, for being really brave and reaching out. So because I do get people that reach out and send messages, but they tend to do it in a way, it's like, I don't want anyone to know or see that I'm interacting with you, because of the shame element. And, you know, I want to acknowledge you also for naming your own discomfort around having the conversation. Like, I don't know where to go, what questions to ask, or how to even start this conversation. And that's the whole thing. That is basically, you know, the work that I do is like giving people and empowering them to actually start to have the conversation, not just with me, but with their partners, you know, because one of the most unusual thing in like sex relationships and dating is we have a general idea of what we want, or how we want to feel, at least. Like we, you know, that's tends to be easier, like for how we want to feel. What we want can be a little bit difficult, because we're listening to so many other different ideas of what we think we should want, because as a man, I should want it this way, because that's what it means to be a man. And as a woman, you know, I've got to be careful, and I need to only want it this way, because otherwise, you know, I'm not going to get the relationships that I want. And so we can become so focused on everybody else that it's really difficult then to tune in, actually, you know, what is it that I want? And so what happens is we end up in dating situations not really clear on what we want moving forward, you know, because some people are looking for relationships in the dating world. Some people are looking for something, you know, they are looking for a relationship, but they're not looking for like marriage or kids. You know, some people are looking for casual meetups. and no one's really fully naming what they want. And quite often, you know, something that I see on dating profiles is people leave so many different options open, rather than just owning what they want. And then as we go into a relationship, you know, quite often people will then choose a relationship. One wants children, the other one doesn't, and they're both hoping that the other person's going to change their mind, because they weren't clear right from the beginning. They're in the relationship like 2 years down the line because they didn't want to have that conversation. And then they find themselves in a situation where they've fallen in love with someone, but they know that that deep desire to have children or not isn't going to be met. And then, you know, we fall into the whole like sex situation where we aren't speaking what we like, what we don't like. Can you do it a bit more to the left, a bit more slowly? You know, we're not asking for that and naming it. And if somebody does ask us, it's like, oh my God, I'm no good, I'm really bad. And we take it all so personally. And then when we do that, we shut the other person down because they don't want to ask again, because if they ask, they don't want to get the reaction. And then we end up in this like loop of silence, you know, not being able to speak. And then we feel like we're not seen, you know, that our needs aren't being met, you know, builds resentment. And then you end up like with this mountain of stuff that, had we just had this simple conversation at the beginning, like we would all know where we're going and what we're doing, and you know, be able to meet each other there. And so, yeah, going back to you, Colin, just acknowledging you for like putting your big boy pants on.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. So it's as you were talking, I'm trying to sort of unpack, because what you were saying really relates. There's so many times that, you know, I've thought about saying something and I didn't, and then so I don't. Maybe it's a good part to talk about. I want to say shame, and we can just frame it around that. Or so in my world, I'll just explain a little bit about me. We can go a bit deeper as we go on. But as a child, you don't think about sex, etc. You kind of, and then you work out that your body can do these things, and you start to be quite curious about yourself, or at least that's exactly how I was. But then there's this stage where that, like, this shame, this thing comes in, and I don't know if it's from society or, you know, I'm gonna say you're watching TV and you've got your hands down your pants. You're just sitting there, but then your mum says, "Wait, stop doing that." It's a simple thing, but you're not actually doing anything. You should just feel comfortable. And then you kind of get this shame, or it's not right, or they think you're going to do that in a restaurant or something like that. I think there's these very subtle signs that, you know, it's not this big, you know, I think maybe in some cultures, but I can only talk about my world and how I grew up. But even then, it was, you know, I'm from England, and I don't know if it's changed. You know, I'm not having that many conversations about sex, but it was something that was behind closed doors, and if it wasn't, then it was a big topic of gossip, and so it was these extremes. And I think that those things in themselves can bring like subconscious messaging that it's not okay to talk about this stuff, and it's not. It's quite shameful, and like, oh, how dare you enjoy sex, because that makes you some sort of, I don't know, loose person, or, you know. And you know, we can talk about the difference, the perception between men and women. That's quite something as well. And but this shame, would you, in your experience, did you think that's the biggest blocker, or is there something else at play, do you think?
Yeah, so like shame is a really interesting emotion. And so you said that you've already discussed emotions on a previous live. And so just to sort of reiterate probably things that you've already discussed, is like, all emotions are really valid, in the sense of, like, you know, what they are teaching us is something about ourselves. So anger is one for like things like boundaries. You know, sadness is something that we need to, because, you know, we approach something's difficult for us, and we need to, you know, quite often it's associated with loss, either future potential loss or a past loss. And so you've got grief. And then, you know, shame is one of those emotions that actually has a lot of value from an evolutionary perspective. So the reason being is, like, if you take us way back before the agricultural revolution, when we were living like in tribes, you know, to stay safe, we had to, and I mean safe from like big predators. There used to be really big mammals that roamed the earth, and so humans were sort of a little bit further down the food chain. And so it was really important for human beings to be able to stay connected to the tribe, because it was being in the tribe that would keep us safe. Okay, which is why on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like belonging, so you got like safety, food, and then belonging is, I can't remember, it's like the second or third up. And so that desire to belong is really important. So what shame does is, shame as an emotion ensures that we are staying connected to our tribe. So when we do something that our tribe would perceive as bad or wrong, then we get the feeling of shame. And if you think about like how you feel when you are feeling shame, it's like this curling up, this wanting to like hold yourself in, to hide, you know, this like almost form of like self-protection. And then what that does is it dims us down, and it means that we are more likely to adapt to what the tribe want us to do. So it has an evolutionary value to it. The thing is, because there are so many, you know, the way the world has changed and adapted, so many different ways of being, conditioning from family, from culture, from religion, that there are elements of who we are and how we show up as human beings where we experience shame, where we don't necessarily, not that we don't need to feel that, but it's going to hold us back. Okay. Yeah. And so shame is like this sense of, I am not a good person, so I am not good. And so one of the ways to sort of work through shame is, first of all, allowing yourself to feel it and to be with it. Because with any emotion, if we don't sit with it and we ignore it, because quite often when we feel shame, most of us will detach ourselves from it, and then we will project that shame onto somebody else with like anger, aggression, defensiveness, you know, it wasn't me. All of those things, we end up projecting it onto the other person. If you can learn to sit with the shame and that feeling of discomfort in your body that arises, then you're less likely to project it out. Next stage is, it's like, you know, I am not a bad person. The thing that I did may have been a bad thing. Okay. And I'm talking here like if we do something to hurt another person, you know, not necessarily sexual shame, because that is related to conditioning that we experience. So, you know, if I do something to hurt somebody, then I'm taking the shame and moving it into guilt. So it's not that I am a bad person. It's like I did a bad thing. And so when we're working with that, then we can show ourselves compassion, because as a human being, I'm going to make mistakes, because like I am, like that's just going to happen. And it's like, how can I have compassion for that part of me that made a mistake? Likely I was making that mistake in a way because I was protecting myself. I did it in a moment where I wasn't thinking properly. It was probably a pattern or behavior that I created as a child, as a teenager, you know, in my younger years, or in a previous relationship, as a means to look after myself and protect myself. How can I give myself compassion? And then from there, it's like, okay, give myself compassion and allow myself to move on and choose to do differently next time, and then just letting it go. And like, that is the process generally when we do something to somebody else where we experience shame. Then you've got things like sexual shame. So where we feel, because of the conditioning that we've had in society, that, you know, I can't talk about sex because it's like, it's a bad, naughty thing. Because like you said, so many people, you know, and when we're children, we don't necessarily understand specifically the message that we're getting. It's this general idea. I put my hands down my trousers. I got this reaction from my caregiver. It must mean this about me. Because when we're children, any information, any direction that we take from a caregiver or any punishment, we internalize it to mean something about us. And you know, whether that's like you paint on the, you're playing with the paints or pens, and then you draw on the wall, your parent shouts at you, what are you doing? You know, you are going to internalize that to mean I'm a bad person. You just do as a young child. And you know, my self-expression isn't welcome here, you know. And then if you're touching yourself, you got your hands down your pants, then it's like, okay, you know, me touching myself is not welcome. Like there's something wrong with that, but we don't necessarily understand what it is, which is why, you know, with kids, it's really important to say, hey, you can do that. It's not appropriate, you know, in the room with everyone, but if you want to go and do that in your room upstairs. So you're like giving them that boundary of what's appropriate and what isn't. You're teaching and educating them of like what society expects and doesn't expect of them as they're a growing human, but without like the shame element of it, without making them feel bad for doing it. And it's, you know, it's difficult because sometimes we do these things reacting, especially for the people in the room. Like we've got friends over and our children do something like that. There's this desire to like, oh my God, you know, the embarrassment. What will they think of me if they see my child with his or her hands down their pants? You know, we bring it back onto ourselves, and that shame that we experience for what our children do, because I'm a bad parent, I'm not very good. We then can end up, if we're not aware, projecting that onto our own children. And so going back to like the element of shame around sexuality, yeah, like you pointed out, it can start off really young. And then, you know, the education that we get at school, which is talking about sex as like just reproduction and STIs, which is all really important to know. But it's like, no one talks about pleasure. No one talks about having conversations around sex. No one, I mean, in the UK, because I know that there'll be some people in LinkedIn listening from all over the place, but you know, in the UK they do talk more now around consent and boundaries, which is important. But sex is also like, as well as saying what you don't want and then saying yes, I consent to something, it's like, how do you know what you do want? You know, and you know, there's not a conversation there of like, go away and have a self-exploration, figure out what you like, and then come back. And so what do people do? They go looking on the internet for information. You know, back in the day when I was younger, I'm 44, so back in the day when I was younger, it was like magazines and, you know, what your friends would tell you. That's where you got your information from, or what other people had tried, you know. And now you've got people, you know, using access to internet. I'm not going to say the word because it might trigger something on LinkedIn. But, you know, to videos online, you know, a lot of people are getting their education there, and that isn't always the healthiest, not to get necessarily education anyway. So, yeah, it's a difficult and complicated subject. But go on, Colin, look like you want to say something.
Yeah, so as you were talking, I was thinking back to school, because we had biology, and then you had you know, textbook pictures of what a penis looks like and a vagina looks like, and that's quite scary in itself, because you go, okay, and then but when you were talking about sex and like boundaries and consent, but then my head was thinking, oh, you're kind of given the same. It feels like they're in the same bracket as, okay, drinking and smoking, these things are not good, and it was like sex. And I don't know why I thought that, but as you were talking, I was like, yeah, it's almost like we're told that this is a bad thing, and it's okay. And so there's this whole conversation that we're not having, and like you say, and then, you know, the internet is you know, a marvelous place. You have the access to all the information, but you can also, you know, you're presented with whoever wins the sponsor and gets to you, you know, the first search results, you know. And again, I was thinking, how did my world of knowledge around sex begin? It was all very secretive. So I'm a little bit older than you, 47, I think. I don't really count my age, but at the time when I was in a teenager, there was this big uproar because they had the Lover's Guide. I don't know if you remember that. It was something that that came on, and they were putting them on to videos, and it was it was just a way to sort of express that there's this other side. But again, it was categorized with all the other type of videos at the time, that like Top Shelf and stuff like that. So I understand why you don't necessarily want children to, young children to do it, but I managed to get those, and I was interested and to watch it, and I was very interested to understand. I've always been curious about these things, and I think as a teenager, you hear all these words and stories. You know, there's these rumors that kids at your school are in a relationship, and you're like, oh, okay. And you want to know more. You want to be able to, well, certainly for me, you want to understand a bit more. You don't want to be scared. You want to have a nice conversation and just be curious. But again, it wasn't something that you'd ever ask your parents about, unless you had quite open parents who were okay with a lot of that stuff. But most times, so I have an older brother, you'd learn stuff from jokes or stories from other people, which are highly overrated, just to make yourself look a lot better in a situation. And yeah, we didn't have that conversation. Everything was closed doors. Everything was, and like you say, that's who we are. It's a big, huge part. And so just going back to your point about the emotions and the shame, and you said, oh, when you feel shame, you deflect it elsewhere, rather than feel it. So for a long time, I've held this belief that awareness is a superpower. That might not be for everybody, but it's for me, because if I understand that something's going on, just pausing for a microsecond to understand, oh, okay, I'm reacting. Why am I reacting? What's going on here? And it doesn't always work, but if you can just say, oh, okay, even if you're in the moment and or retrospectively look at, okay, I give the example of shouting at my kids. Why did I shout at my kids? What's going on? It's, all kids are there to test you sometimes, but it's not, excuse me, it's not about the kids, it's about me. And there's stuff carrying on in my brain, and then I've been thinking about something negatively, and then I said this before, it switches from the back of my brain to the front of my brain, and then my interaction is with the kids, and it's almost immediately I see that they're doing something wrong, and I end up shouting at them. I'm like, whoa, like that's not okay. And so I spent a while trying to just breathe, just a microsecond, just to go, okay, what's going on? And no one's perfect. I'm not trying to be perfect, and anyone that says that you are is on a hiding to nothing. But this awareness of the things that are going on in our brains, in our bodies, that we often push away, we try and cover up with other stuff. And again, a lot of my conversations, so especially around business, tend to be, okay, we're trying to fix the symptom, and the reality is you need to look at the root cause. And that's why I think these conversations are so important, because let's run through a scenario. Okay, excuse me, let me just drink, and that might help me out a bit. The water's not because I'm nervous about the conversation. It's just frog in my throat. So, but yeah, so let's say a man or a woman has an executive position in work, and then at home the night before, that they want to be intimate with their partner, and something doesn't happen and doesn't work or something, and they don't talk about it. Okay, and then because you don't talk about it, why are you not talking about it? What's the reason you're not talking about that? Is that about you? Is it about them? But if that conversation doesn't happen, and again, we can maybe talk about how I see it, because it might be different for many people, but you carry that forward, like you said, into the next day. And let's imagine you were going to be intimate, and you thought, oh yeah, I'm going to be intimate, and then you don't. There's a frustration, there's an energy in your body that's I want to say unmet, which makes, I don't know if that sounds negative, I'm not sure. It's but and you were looking forward to intimacy with your partner, and then it doesn't happen, and the next day you're like, oh, like you've got this, not aggression, but this frustration or irritability. Like, wow, you just carry that absolutely into the next day. And if you're leading a team, leading a company, wow, like the impact that you have on everyone, you could make a very quick snap decision. And like you say, that ripples down into meetings, into people not wanting to stay, people not telling, what you really need to hear, a whole load of stuff.
And it's interesting you say that, because everyone can relate to someone at work who gets angry or shouts or whatever, and everyone jokingly says he's not getting laid. Like, and they do say that because it is a thing, like, because there is that, because it's not just about the sexual frustration. And I know, some women that might be listening may be like, well, men feel entitled to it. And it's just, it's so multi-layered, because women can get rejected for sex from men, and the reasons why for all of this are so deep. And so just something that I want to speak to about is like, men are socialized really not to be vulnerable. So they're socialized to get on with it, keep quiet, don't ask for help, move forward. And so the problem, the issue with that becomes that, men don't have that opportunity in the same way as women do to connect with other men and share openly and speak to them about things. And so a lot of men have to, or feel in the position that they can, that the only place that they can emotionally vent, let's say, is with their female partner. And it's the same with physical touch. Like, as human beings, we need physical touch. But again, men don't have that opportunity to like give each other a hug. And if they do, it's like in a really manly way, because I don't want to be gay. And so that physical interaction comes only from their female partner. And so, when women say, men just want sex, it's like, well, to a certain extent, yeah, because that's where they get their physical intimacy and connection, because a lot of men are being taught that it's not manly to be cuddly and want hugs and stuff. And, when I've worked with men, because unfortunately a lot of men come to for support, not like, oh, things could be better. It's like, it's on the precipice of a situation, or the situation's already happened. So it's like almost on the brink of divorce type of thing. And they come to me and they've got to such a point where like sex has been so far down the road the last time that they did it, that actually they've come to a place now where, gosh, I would just like a cuddle on the sofa, that I would just like that, because it's become so far, actual sexual contact has become so far removed. So, so I think that's important to name with the whole rejection thing, is like there's an element of conditioning around that. That a lot of men can experience, and women feel then frustrated and used, and then, women desire the emotional safety. They want to have that affection in between sex. And there's different reasons that they don't get that. One of the reasons being is, like I said, sometimes the conditioning that men have around physical intimacy that isn't sexual. And then another one can be like, especially in partnership, women often take on a lot of the mental and emotional load, and they self-sacrifice, and they don't, and this is such a deep conversation, and some women may misunderstand what I'm going to say and say, oh, you're thinking that we should take on the load for everything and the emotional labor for everything, which I'm not saying. But what can happen is, and what I see a lot in my female clients is, they will take on the emotional mental load. They don't clearly communicate to their partner what they need. What they're doing is passive aggressive comments, hints at the fact that they're overwhelmed and that they've got a lot on, but they're not actually saying to their partner, hey, I'm really tired. Sex doesn't interest me because I'm absolutely exhausted, and I'm feeling really resentful. This isn't the way to have the conversation, I just want to point out, but this is what they're feeling. I'm really resentful because, because they're just not doing anything. Like, that's what's actually going on underneath the surface, which means that they don't want to have sex. Whereas, you know, when they change how they speak and they show up and they have those needs met and they have the space then to be fun and playful and all of the things, then men automatically respond to that with affection in between sex. Like it just naturally happens. And then for women, you know, there'll be women who reach out to men wanting that sexual intimacy. And, you know, what can happen there is in those dynamics, what I've seen before is because men are under the social condition is that men want sex all the time and they're always up for it and ready for it. And this isn't true. Like, it's just not true. You know, yes, maybe in their 20s are a lot more up for it. But, you know, as they get older, a lot of men especially want sex that's intimate, that feels connected, that feels safe. Okay. And so if they're in a relationship situation where they're not feeling safe with their partner for whatever reason, or they've got a lot of stuff on at work, or they've got worries and stresses that they're not really talking to their partner about, or maybe they are talking to their partner about them, but she is invalidating them, then yeah, what can happen is that those men, you know, when you're stressed, your libido and desire is affected. Like it just is as a human being, because when you're stressed, if you think back evolutionarily speaking, stress is a response to our environment to survive. You know, if you're in survival mode, you're not in reproductive mode, you know, so it makes biological sense that you're not. So you need to be happy and relaxed. And so, yeah, for men, a lot of it can be like work, stress related, how able they are to share what their fears are in the relationship without women sort of trying to fix it. Because, you know, the problem is with a lot of us, when we communicate how we feel, is the other person comes in and tries to fix it, or, oh, it's not that bad, or you'll be okay. Yeah, that might be true, but it can also feel like it's what we're expressing is being shut down. And so, you know, when sharing, something that I always suggest to people is when you want to share something, say, hey, I need to get something off my chest. I don't want your advice and your opinion, but it'd be really great if you just listened. And are you open to that? Yes, I am. Okay, here it is. You know, or if you're the person that has someone coming to you that wants to share, it's like, okay, do you want advice, opinion, or do you just want me to listen? Like, what do you want right now? Okay, you know, I just want you to listen. Great, share away. And working really hard to keep your mouth closed and not want to share your advice or opinion. And, you know, and when we feel listened to and heard and the other person is like listening and we've expressed that, there's like, whew, we've let it go, and we can then just, you know, move on from it, whether you're a man or a woman. And that helps build the connection and the intimacy. And so, but going back to, you know, what you were saying with regards to, the night before and how that can affect, it's all of these conversations are something a lot deeper that's happening in the relationship generally. Because, you know, if you find yourself being rejected frequently, you need to have a conversation around that. Like, is it the way that I'm initiating? Is it the time of day? You know, like what's going? Are you, you know, finding out from each other what's happening? Like having that conversation and listening to each other from a place of respect. You know, whether it's the man initiating or the woman initiating. You know, having that conversation. And a good way to start that conversation is always, so if I'm the person that's being rejected, a good place for me to start is ask the other person what they want. Because then I get my chance then to share what I want as well. Whereas if I go in straight away with what I want, you know, it can put the other person on the back foot of like feeling, oh, I'm not good enough, or, you know, or there's this expectation of me that puts pressure on. Because a lot of people think like, if we just don't talk about it, maybe it will sort itself out. Like, really doesn't happen like that, you know?
Yeah, so, no good decisions are done by sweeping it under the carpet, right? It's just, yeah,
and so many people do that. They just hope that if they keep going along, something's going to shift or change. And, you know, it's very rarely that that's actually going to happen. And so, yeah, sharing, first of all, like, okay, you know, I'd really love to hear how you're finding our sex life at the moment. You know, what are the things that you want, don't want, like, what are you worried about, are you experiencing pleasure? Because particularly for women, like, women get bored of monogamy a lot sooner than men do, because women like variety in their relationships. So like when you look at the statistics for relationships being opened up, so what I mean by that is with people that open their relationships to then, go to parties or have threesomes or all of those different things. 2/3 of the relationships that are opened up are done so by women. So women instigate it. And so women are extremely sexual, but they just need the right conditions. And quite often what happens is that the mistake that a lot of women make is, they'll go into sex with a new person, new relationship, and because of all of like the chemicals that are going off in their body, just having sex feels good because they're connecting to the person. If they're not having orgasms or they're not getting that much pleasure, it doesn't necessarily matter too much, because they're just enjoying the novelty of being with that person. The problem is for women is if they're not experiencing pleasure, orgasms, and an element of novelty, they end up getting bored. At which point, when they get bored, they just lose interest in sex, because like, if it's not enjoyable, why am I going to do it? And you do get women that will lie there passively just to get it over and done with, but a lot of women will end up sort of finding excuses and gradually moving away. And then men think, oh, women don't like sex, and it's like, no, it's not true. It's the sex that they're getting or they're not getting. And so having conversations around like, what do you like, what do you enjoy, what brings you pleasure, what would you have differently, those are really important conversations to have. And the thing is, quite often we don't want to have those conversations because we might hear something that we don't want to, like, because I've worked with women that have been in relationships, like being married for like 15 years, never had an orgasm with their partner, faked it the whole time because they didn't feel safe enough to be able to say to them, hey, can you do it a bit more gently and a little bit more to the left, and it takes me longer than 3 minutes, so, and they don't feel comfortable having that conversation. And the problem is also, a lot of men don't realize, and what they don't understand is, a men can go from one relationship to the next thinking that they are doing the right thing, because maybe they are not open enough to listen to the women that they're with, and not able to take feedback and directions. And so they end up repeating the same things on women because they're not safe for women to share their experiences with. Men will then, be quite closed to feedback. The women then fake their orgasms. So men like go from one relationship to the next until they meet a woman who's confident enough to say, hey, that doesn't work for me. And he's confused because it's like, it worked in all of my other partners. And it's like, oh. But the statistics show that like 30 to 60% of women, depending on the study, have orgasms with their partners. So when you look at the statistics, like, it's very probable and very likely, that the previous women, if they never shared anything about their sexual experience with you, it's likely that they were faking it. Which is really, to hear that for the first time as a man is like, really uncomfortable. But then it's like, okay, how can I empower myself to get good at listening and broaching the conversation, be with that discomfort as somebody says, it would be really good if you did this or did it like that, or can I be honest with you, it hurts when you do this thing.
Yeah. There's so many things that you're saying so what I realized is that this is actually very complex. As in, I know it doesn't need to be. It can be made a lot simpler by conversations, and for people reaching out to people like you that can, maybe bridge the conversation between what's not, or just, create a starting point. Because, if you've not said anything for your entire relationship, and then, the longer that it goes on, oftentimes it's harder to say it because you go, oh, okay. And, I'm just thinking, we often assume, right, our own thinking we project on other people. Okay, that's how they must be feeling, or et cetera, et cetera. So But the way you were talking is all of these different dynamics, all these things are at play, these emotions, these things that are unsaid, these desires that we want, these assumptions that men want sex and women don't. And actually, it all starts with a conversation. And that makes it sound very simple. But to get to that point, oftentimes I would imagine, couples are going through crisis, because I talk, most of my LinkedIn lives are around business. And I believe it's most things that aren't being said are the important things, and we don't talk about it. This is why these conversations are really important, because, you have to be brave. And like you said, if let's just take an example, there's so many different dynamics that could work, but say the woman is feeling unsafe to say what it is that she needs from the man. Why is that? There's a dynamic going on there, has he got an ego he doesn't want to, etc. Like a million scenarios I can think of maybe in my head. But as hard as that is, if you can have a conversation, and I would again imagine if you can get past that uncomfortableness, and I wanted to say shame, and it's not shame, that uncomfortableness, to go and have a conversation with someone like you that can translate both sides. Because my girlfriend now, we talk very openly, and she's explained to me that females, from her perspective and the friends that she has, they want intimacy, and often men misunderstand that. And I'm quite curious about all that. And again, you mentioned it about, we say something, and then our partner, and I'm going to generalize and say it's often men that say, oh yeah, we'll solve that, or I'll fix that for you. And this is my understanding, so shoot me down if I'm saying anything that's wrong, but oftentimes it's females don't want you to solve their problems, they just want you to listen. And I don't know if that's in our DNA or how it is, but I've caught myself many times, and I have to stop myself just going, oh, okay, it's just sit, don't get up, don't react, just listen. And there's so much power in listening. And if you can stop getting in your own way and listen to your partner and go beyond what you think they're saying, and just go, okay. And I think creating an environment where you can talk is excuse me, super important. It's so powerful. It starts that conversation. And we can often say, we blame the other person, say, well, they don't listen to me, etc. But it can start with yourself. Just say, okay, look, I'm going to do this. And then I start to think about selfishness, because going back quite a few conversations ago, you were talking about asking other people what they want in a conversation first. But then oftentimes I was a born people pleaser, and I put everybody's needs before mine, and I've done that all my life, regardless. Teachers, parents, brother, girlfriends, etc. And I've done that. And I found that extremely difficult to put myself first, because I have this thing in the back of my head that when you say what you want, it's selfish. And again, I'm sure that's something from childhood, whether it's in a school or, and again, it comes to your point, how we internalize things as kids. And it can be very difficult just to say what you want. But something tells me oftentimes when you say what you want, it's a lot easier, because the other thing is suppressing all that emotions, hiding it, going off on your own rather than being with your partner, and just hiding that, being secret and all that thing. But actually just be comfortable. Okay, you'll give your partner a grace period just to go, well, this is strange behavior, and and allow them a moment to go away and think about it. Their reaction might be, oh, well, but give them a moment, just try it. and that's hard because often there, and again, this is why I think it's so complex, because there's so many dynamics in relationships, right? Not just the sexual part, just how you show up, codependency. Okay, if they're not happy, I'm not happy. Talking about myself very much. So, but, all of these things are at play, and when that comes to things like the bedroom, yeah, you're not going to say you don't want to. You fear the other person's reaction. So, yeah, that's that part. I'd like to just sort of say in terms of this misconception about men and women. So, two things that I've really struggled with my whole life. The first, is that I've often heard this message, and you referenced it earlier, that men want sex all the time and that they think about sex every 10 seconds. And I've never done that. So I went through my teenage years thinking about sex all the time, making sexual innuendos, just, because it was the teenage years and I was obsessed and always looking for opportunities, etc. And that was quite something in my mind. But so something happened to me. I'll say it, and we can reference it if you want to. But there was a teenage pregnancy in my early life. When I was a teenager, I had a girlfriend at the time, and she was pregnant, and I didn't tell anyone. Didn't tell my parents. Didn't tell my brother, my friends, no one at school. And we arranged for the baby to be terminated, and only her and I knew about it. And it was very, it was an exceedingly difficult time, especially as a teenager. You've still got a lot going on, and you don't know what's best to do. You can see your whole life changing in front of you. You're with someone maybe that's not right, but you've now created a life in a situation and you don't know what's best to do. You feel all this shame, this guilt, and it changed something in me. It impacted how I showed up, and I associated sex for the longest time with pain. So I went from being a teenager who was just obsessed, never had it, just obsessed, to having sex and to resulting in a child that ultimately I didn't want, and my girlfriend at the time didn't want it, and not being able to talk to anyone about that because I didn't want to let people down. So for the longest time, I carried this association of sex with pain and hurt and not being able to share, not being able to talk about it. And I carried that into so many of my relationships, and for more of my life than it was before all of that happened. And over time, I've told certain people, my friends don't even know, one, maybe two. There was some rumors at the time, maybe, but I lied, I denied it. Had a big impact on me, and I didn't tell my parents. They don't know now. But this association with sex, and that it's something that men always want. And I think there's a lot of things that happen in our past, or the way that, and again, it doesn't need to be, there's a lot worse scenarios than I can imagine than happened to me. And there's a lot less, but that doesn't make it any less traumatic. If you have something in your past and you carry that forward into your relationships, and that can be very difficult. I did share this, not with all my partners, but certainly with ones that I felt there was a long-term future. And sometimes I think I also used that as an excuse. And I think I talked about it in therapy at some point as well. I kind of skipped over it, but I know it showed up in a lot of ways. And I think it stopped me talking about things. And just, I think one of the biggest things, it changed who I was, it changed my relationship with sex, and this thing that happened. And sex should be a very enjoyable, pleasurable thing that you can find on your own, but with a partner or others. I have no, I have, any way that you want to do it is absolutely fine. We should be all open-minded about that, but not talking about it and, having this negative association, even if you think you've dealt with it, I think there's a lot that actually went unsaid, and it took a big event in my life to change that. And I'm like, oh, okay. But this association of sex that we have about men, and I often felt, so I don't know, I'm a little bit confused whether it's what happened to me or it's just who I am, but I prefer the romance of talking to someone. So there's this misconception, I think, of men will just sleep with anyone, but I don't. I want to connect with my partner. I want to talk. I want to connect. I want to understand, and that often is seen as almost like a feminine way of being. And I've never really shared that with anyone. I've never shared it with my friends because I think there is this bravado of, okay, men are a certain way and you can't say those things, otherwise you look like there's many words, I'm going to say sissy to dumb it down a little bit. But I think there's a lot of men probably feel the same way. But also I want to flip it around the other way, that, there's this misconception that, so this is the second thing, that women don't like sex. And this is, it's like this, oh yeah, men do, and they're like caveman type thing, and there's women that are. And I come to realize that's actually, well, based on your statistics, it's, it's even the other way around often. And I think that's very sad, because I think there's many men and women don't understand that. And again, the same as me, I've never talked about that. So unless we start having that dialogue, start saying it's okay, and start feeling it's okay to say those things, then I don't think much will change. And again, just in my situation, you can carry it on into future relationships, and it can have an impact. So sorry, that was a long monologue. I'm sorry if there's a lot to unpack in there, but yeah, I kind of wanted to share it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Colin. And like, I can imagine, as how old did you say you were? 17 at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that would have been extremely isolating, because if you weren't speaking to anybody, like anybody at all, and you were by yourself, that is for any human being, especially a 17-year-old boy who's still finding his way in the world. Like, what does it mean to be a man, when you're 17? I mean, a lot of men are still trying to figure that out, and they're in their 40s and 50s, what it means to be a man. And so, yeah, and I think this is the problem and the issue that men are put under around like communication and talking about things. And, part of me wonders if you had been encouraged as, a young man to talk about things, to talk about your emotions, to talk about how you feel, to get support, to get help when you need it. Part of me wonders, like, would that have carried on in your relationship? Because when we share things with other people and they hold space for that and they listen without judgment, we're able to let it go and move on. And the thing is, like, as a 17-year-old, your brain's not fully developed as a human until you're like 25 or 26, something along those lines. And so your brain is under a huge amount of like development at a really important time, hormones, all of the things. And then not being able to process that, it makes absolute sense that you would carry that forward. And if you had talked and you had been held without judgment, like, I imagine there would have been a lot more lightness moving forward. It's probably your own teenage brain that connected sex, to the unwanted pregnancy, and then to the abortion, and then look, this is what I do to women. This part of me, it sounds like you have associated this, young virile man out to like explore the world, sexually, which is healthy, you know, to do all of that. And it's like, okay, this is a bad thing because this is the consequence of it. And you've connected and linked it to that without anyone supporting you and helping you unpack it there and then. And then even, you know, now as an adult, like there's an element of you that understands that, no, it's not related. You're still holding on to that 17-year-old self who's like, I need to be mindful of how I show up in sex because there's a risk. So I need to protect myself from any future pain, because if I don't, then I could end up harming another woman, you know. And it's likely there's that element that's like, okay, I need to be mindful of my own sexuality and my self-expression because I'm potentially dangerous. I could, you know, get somebody pregnant unwanted and then, you know, cause them upset and pain and cause myself pain because, you know, of the choice of not to have it. So yeah, and this is why I think it's really important that there are more conversations, you know, not just for teenagers, but, you know, which is the whole reason of us having this conversation today. It's like, we need to have more conversations around this thing, have open spaces where people can share freely. I mean, in the northwest of England where I live, I run women's circles and we talk about sex. And I've got like loads of colleagues that do embodiment things around sexuality. So by embodiment practices, I mean, you know, they do things where women connect to their bodies and listen to their bodies and their yes and their no and all of the different things. And they learn to express themselves sexually, not necessarily doing sexual acts, but actually like connecting to their sexual energy. And, you know, this sort of innovative idea that I had of like, well, what if we just sat around and talked about sex? Because like most of us don't even talk to our friends. And I was going to women's networking meetings and, you know, the women would say, oh, it's great when you're around, Carla, because it's like we've got permission to talk about sex because we've got nowhere else to talk about it. And it was like, wow, like that's a really profound thing. And so I have this very, very simple women's circle where we just come talk about sex. There's a Q&A. Some people may want coaching or support or advice or something along those lines. Everybody else gets to learn from everybody. You know, there are some women doing like, you know, really unusual things. They're going to like play parties or into BDSM. And then there are some women that are very, very vanilla and like all of it's welcome, you know. And there's so much power to be had in being able to share our own stories and also listen to other people's, because I'm sure like as a 17-year-old boy, if you'd had that space, like things would have felt felt very, very different. So yeah, so I'm sorry, Colin, that like you didn't have that opportunity to be able to process that at the time when you needed to.
Yeah, thank you. I think everything happens to us and we learn a lot from it. So, you know, I know it's not an ideal thing to go through, but maybe that's the reason why we're having this conversation. That's why you know, that this is important to me. But, you know, it's not just that. It's these things happen to us and they're linked to sex, but it's how we show up every day. And I was just thinking about your, like you said, the women's circle, and it's just accepting of, you know, all people, all types without judgment. And I think we judge ourselves constantly, and we are really hard on ourselves. I have this critic in my head that's just constantly nonstop. It's trying to be kinder to me, but it's taken a little while to remember that. And again, that starts with an awareness. But I think oftentimes when I see people judging other people or arguing, I realize that critic in their head is probably a lot louder than the one that you hear out in the open. And I think when we're kinder to ourselves, we can be kinder to other people. And, you know, just because we live our lives a certain way or have a sexual preference or something, that doesn't mean that we're better or worse than anyone else. And I think if we can disparage those ideas, because I love the idea that, you know, you have all of these different people, different ladies come and talk about these things. And because some of that, if you allow yourself to be open and receptive to what everyone else is doing, not take that on you in any way. And you have to be careful that, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not this adventurous. Just be okay with you, but also listen to what's going on for other people, because there's maybe some lessons in there. Maybe you aren't vanilla, or maybe if you're too adventurous, you don't want to be, and you're doing it for other unhealthy reasons or something. I think you can really learn a lot from other people, but it starts again with awareness. Don't judge yourself too harshly. Don't judge other people, and reach out to these people. And I guess I'll try and sum up, because I know we're going over the hour, but also understanding that people like you exist, and that these things are a huge part of our life. We didn't talk about sex, or my parents didn't talk about sex, but these things are so important. That intimacy, that relationship, that physical relationship you have with yourself, that physical relationship you have with your partner, and if you've got kids as well, that can, if they see that, I think part of why I didn't tell my parents is like this shame and this, but if we can be a bit more open, it might not even just be for you. It might be that you're trying to help your kids, just be a bit more open. And, and if you're struggling with it, oftentimes I go, oh, could I do this for my children? And it makes me, it's just one more incentive for me to try and do something that's maybe a bit challenging for me. So, it was a lot of words, but I just want to say thank you for doing what you do. And thank you for being here and listening to me, but sharing all of that. There's so much more that I would like to talk to you about. I think, I think we could do a round two. So I guess maybe there's a lot of people either watching it live or watching on the replay. If people want to get in contact with you, obviously you're on LinkedIn. Is that the best place for people to reach out to you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and then I have my website, which is carlacrivaro.com. And then I'm also on Instagram. Instagram is a little bit more open with some of the content that I can publish. So my handle there is @the.sexuality.sanctuary, and I also have a YouTube channel. If you just search my name, you'll find it there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I would like people just to send messages. It doesn't have to be in the group chat. It can just be direct message either to you or to me. And maybe we do another one, because, my brain's exploding. There's so many things that we didn't get to talk about, because I'm very curious about the dynamics behind it. And, maybe some of the common things that people come up, because I think if people can see, oh, okay, that happens to me, etc., then maybe they would start talking about it. And again, it's such an important thing. We don't think about it related to business, but it really does. Business is, we go to work for 7-8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's a big part of our life. Why not make that better by talking about these subjects? So I think it's a good thing to do. So, Carla, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure for me. So thank you very much. And hopefully we'll get to do a round two.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, for your bravery in inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, fantastic. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.